My name is Katherine Blackwell, and I am a licensed marriage and family therapist, and I have a private practice near Camp Lejeune. So I am actually originally from California. We've been here about 7 years now, and my husband is a soft enabler. I was working on Camp Lejeune for about 5 years, and then I got really frustrated with the position I was in, which limited how much I was able to do with the Marines. So it was a really good counseling position. I don't know if you guys if anyone's familiar with the MFLAC program. So I was an MFLAC for a while. It has a good concept to it, but we are not able to work with trauma. And so I found it very limiting. So I left and started my own private practice in Holly Ridge, and here I am. So I mentioned I am a licensed marriage and family therapist, which is a little bit of a misnomer because I don't actually do any marriage or family therapy. I actually specialize in sports and performance enhancement and sports psychology. So what I do is I work with, originally it was supposed to be athletes and military, and I started to get a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of retired athletes, transitioning military. And so what I've noticed that the common thread of the type of person that comes into my office is they are a high performance individual. So whatever that means, they're someone who is really driven. And usually when they end up in my office, it's because they've gotten stuck. So it could be something as simple as they'll come in and just tell me that they have a mental block and they're not quite sure how to get out of that. Or it can be something as serious as maybe they've had multiple deployments and now they have some pretty serious trauma that is keeping them from functioning. So I have a variety, like I said, of clients that come in to see me. I have kids as young as 8, all the way up to adults. I think my oldest is in his 60s. And they all come in, and like I said, the common theme is the high performance mindset. But the way I conceptualize mental health issues, I use what Stephen Porges calls the Polyvagal Theory. So, and I apologize ahead of time, I can geek out so hard on this. So if I ever lose you, like write it down or raise your hand. I think you can raise your hand in Zoom. But I'll try and kind of keep it brief and not geek out too hard. But Stephen Porges, he came up with the Polyvagal Theory in, I believe it was like 1994. And so what he's saying is that instead of what I believe they previously thought, which is that we had the sympathetic and the parasympathetic, and the sympathetic was bad and the parasympathetic was good, he kind of developed a little bit further, saying that we have the parasympathetic and the sympathetic, but the parasympathetic has 2 branches. And what helps us when we go into fight, flight, and freeze response, what helps us get out of that is social connection. And so that's kind of what I took from that theory, and that's how I help people. So when they come to see me, their nervous system isn't functioning optimally. And what I mean by that is if you go off of experiences that you've had, if you've had a negative experience, I'm going to say that they call it traumas. You have little T's and big T's. Your little T's, the little traumas, those are those everyday things that you might not realize are affecting you, but they're affecting you. And then you have your big T's, which are, assault, war, deployments, the ones that are like, oh yeah, okay, that's obvious, that's a trauma. The little T's are the ones that you might not even realize are traumatizing. And so what we go over is that when you have all these experiences and they get accumulated in your body, they get stored, right? They get stored for survival reasons. So your body and your brain remember these things that have happened to you to keep you alive, right? So that way, when you're in the situation again, it's going to alert you, so you get out of it. And so what I do is I teach them to understand what state they're in, and then we use brain spotting to help them regulate it. A very specific example. Say I have someone coming in and they've been on a deployment, and during the deployment, they had some difficult things happen, and they've come back from deployment, and now they're realizing that they're really anxious, they're getting super irritable, a lot of the symptoms that you would associate with PTSD, right? So what I would do is I would talk with them about the nervous system, talk about how when you experience those things that your body holds onto those, and then I help them recognize which state they're in so they can get out of that state. And so what I mean by state is you have fight, flight, and freeze. And it's actually fight is second and flight is first. And they go in order too. So when you come across something, when you come across a threat and your body decides that it's a threat and not an opportunity or safe, it's going to trigger that. And Stephen Porges calls this neuroception. It's your body's internal scanning system, and you're constantly looking for threats. And so when you come across a threat, then you start with flight. I always want to say it backwards. You start with flight. Our initial urge is to want to get away. Now, if that's not possible, if we cannot physically run away, physically get away, or if it's frowned upon to run away, then we automatically will go into fight. Now, if you are in fight and you feel like that is not possible and your system becomes overwhelmed, that's when you go into freeze. So when you're in flight, that's where I'm seeing like those anxiety symptoms, right? Your heart rate is beating. Ugh, if I could talk. Your heart rate is beating. That's where I see panic, fear, anxiety, worry, and concern. Blood pressure goes up, adrenaline goes up. This is where your fuel storage decreases, insulin activity decreases, digestion, salivatory response decreases, and your immune response decreases. This is also occurring in the fight response. So this is with the sympathetic activation. So with this, this is where I'm also seeing muscle guarding, pain, the hunched posture. You can be hyper aroused and hyper focused in this state. With the fight piece, this is where I see rage and anger, irritation, frustration, annoyance, disgust, lying, trying to control the situation. So when you are in fight or flight, these are the things that are happening. You're only meant to have been in fight or flight for a really brief period, 30 seconds, so you can actually get out of that situation. What happens when you're in chronic stress, or when you're in a situation where it's prolonged and you're not able to get out of it, then the way I conceptualize it is your body rewires to be in that state, because with neuroplasticity, your body's going to rewire to do what you're doing more of. It's wanting to be as efficient as possible. So if you're constantly in a state of fight or flight, it's going to rewire for fight or flight. So the way I look at this is, if you guys are familiar with the Oscar colors, so the reason why I'm bringing that up is the way I see it with deployments is, if you're going off of the Oscar colors, green is you're good to go, right? You're experiencing stress, but that's the eustress, the positive stress. And then when you start to experience more stress, that's when you go into yellow, if we're going off the Oscar colors. When you're in orange, when you're starting to experience a lot more stress and it's becoming noticeable and you're having a more difficult time coping. And then red is, they deem it as like hospitalization or medical intervention necessary. But red is like the extreme form of stress where you're having some major issues now. And so the way I perceive it, when you're deployed or when you're in a chronic state of stress, you go into orange, right? We'll say you're in orange and you're operating at orange for every day for a few months. Well, orange becomes your new green. Does that make sense? It's your new baseline. So that fight or flight is your new baseline. So where this comes into play is, I don't know if you guys have ever been like super busy, on the go, or had a lot of chronic stress. And then all of a sudden, I don't know, maybe you're experiencing now with the pandemic, when you're not on the go and you're not like at that high pace, then all of a sudden when things are slow becomes very uncomfortable. And it's because you're now used to operating at that fight or flight pace. So what I do is I help the people that come in recognize which state they're in, if they're operating at it, like what's their primary state, because usually you'll have like a go-to state where maybe it's more of the anxiety, maybe it's more of the anger. The freeze response, that's when you hit overwhelm and you shut down. And so the way I look at freeze response is that's when you're starting to see those depressed symptoms, right? You're starting to get lethargic. You don't have the energy. You don't have the energy because your body has actually gone into self-preservation mode. So it's not producing the energy. So you don't have the energy, hopelessness, numbness. I hear numbness a lot comes into my office. They don't feel anything. And with the freeze state, I also see this as being, none of these are necessarily terrible. They obviously can elicit some really negative responses. But if you think about it in terms of like your body is trying to protect you, so they're meant to be helpful. And I see some of these states where I think you can still function in them. And then it's like your window of tolerance is smaller. So you might be good, and then all of a sudden something small sets you off because your window of tolerance is just way smaller. But where I see the freeze response too is I see burnout there, like autopilot, where you're just going through the motions. And then the fuck it's. I see the fuck it's in freeze response too. You just don't even care. So those are the fight, flight, and freeze. So now where Dr. Porges talks about is social engagement. And social engagement is when you're feeling calm, safe, and connected. And this is a really important state because we're wired to connect. We're not meant to be in isolation. We're not meant to be by ourselves. We're wired for connection. And so social engagement is what helps us get out of fight, flight, or freeze. And it's really important. So the social engagement piece is not just safety in the obvious sense of it, but the way I like to look at safety is like you can let your freak flag fly. Like you're able to be who you are. You aren't worried someone's judging you. You aren't worried, that people are going to talk crap about you. You are able to just completely be who you are in the moment, free of judgment. And that's how I look at that safety piece as well. So if you have friends and family or a spouse who you feel that with, then that can be really good to help you get out of those states. But sometimes, if you're married and you've been married a long time and you have a lot of disagreements or something, every now and then, you don't feel that safety and connection with your spouse. Or maybe you have friends, but you don't really feel like you can be completely yourself around them. So you're not going to get that safe and connection piece that's going to help you get out of that fight, flight, and freeze response. So going back to that dysregulated nervous system, so if you're in a constant state of fight or flight, and then you have a really small window of tolerance, anytime, I don't know, it could be little or small, but anytime you get to the point of overwhelm, you're going to go into that freeze response. And so if you're not able to kind of discharge that energy, because your body produces energy to react, you're not able to discharge that energy, it gets stored in your nervous system. Your body and your brain remember it. And then if you're not able to get out of that with the social engagement, you just kind of keep cycling around the fight, flight, and freeze response. And the thing with the pandemic right now is the way we respond to situations is based on our previous experiences. And so what they're talking about with the pandemic is a lot of people who have never been through anything like this, they're just constantly cycling through fight, flight, or freeze because their brain doesn't know how to respond to it. It does not have it stored anywhere in its memory how to respond to a pandemic. So you're just kind of rotating through fight, flight, and freeze. And if you're by yourself, you're isolated, you don't have that social connection, it can become really frustrating and debilitating sometimes. So what I do is to help people get their nervous system re-regulated is I use a technique called brain spotting. And brain spotting goes off of the theory that where you look affects how you feel. And so when I have someone come in, what I have them do is I have them tell me about what they want to work on. And an example would be, I'm trying to think of something like super common. Anxiety would probably be, or you know what, fear of failure. I say right now, fear of failure is probably the one that is the biggest that's walking in my door right now. And so I have a lot of perfectionists. And so anytime that they do something wrong, they're getting really upset. And so I'll have someone come in and they'll tell me what they want to work on, and say they want to work on their fear of failure. I'll have them tell me about a time where they experienced that. And then they'll tell me about it. And then what comes next is I ask them where they notice feeling it in the body. So if you've ever felt really anxious about something and you've noticed like your heart beating really fast, you've noticed that nervousness, a lot of times with anxiety, you feel it right here. Like it's in my throat, it's in my chest, it's in my stomach. They'll tell me where they feel it. And so once they can locate for me where they feel it, we find an eye position. Super weird sounding. I have a pointer and I help them find their eye position with the pointer. We don't have to use the pointer, but I usually do. And if you notice, if there's something that's bothering you and you notice where you feel it in your body, you can even do this right now if there's something you can think about that elicits a feeling in your body, a sensation in your body. If you look to your left and hold your gaze for 10 seconds, and then you look straight and hold your gaze for 10 seconds, and then you look to the right and hold your gaze for 10 seconds. There will be one direction where that feeling increases. And that signals to me where that brain spot is. And you'll feel it. And we go off of the X and Y axis with this, but we can also incorporate the Z axis. And so I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with vergence, but vergence is a technique you can do to calm your nervous system down. And so the Z axis is going off of like that concept of vergence. So when we find that brain spot, and there's multiple ways to find it too. So if you look in any of those directions and you don't notice it change, I can actually find it for you, because what I'm looking for with this technique is your non-reflexive movements. I'm looking for eye blinks, I'm looking for twitching, shaking. I'm looking for the little signals that tell me we're getting close. And when we start to get close, it's kind of weird, because like you'll start blinking a lot. Every now and then I'll get like someone twitch, and that tells me that we're going in the right direction. And so then when we find that brain spot, I'll ask you your SUDS. So what's the subjective, I never remember the acronym stand for. It's the level of distress. So on a scale of 1 to 10, I'll have you tell me how distressful it is. And then I'll have you follow it. It's the weirdest concept. What we're doing is we're using focused mindfulness. So you're literally noticing that feeling. So say we'll go with my example, the person comes in, they notice that feeling of anxiety really strong in their throat. It's on a scale of 5. We found their brain spot over here, and now the feeling has gone to about a 7. So what I'll tell them to do is notice that feeling and follow it. And so when I'm doing that, what I mean by follow it is thoughts will pop up, memories will pop up, body sensations. It's different every time. Sometimes it can be all thoughts and memories. Sometimes it can be all body tension, body aches, body pains. And you just follow it. You just keep following it. And it's with non-judgmental curiosity. So you're not trying to understand why it's coming up or why it's happening. You're just kind of letting your brain organize and sort and process the upsetting event. Now, with people who have complex PTSD, complex trauma, if we start from a place of activation, it can be too much for them. And so we can start from a place of resource. And a place of resource is where you feel the most grounded and connected. And so we start from that body place of feeling grounded and connected, and then we do the same thing. What I'm trying to avoid is I don't want the person in there to go outside of their window of tolerance. So far I haven't had that happen, and it's not a major thing if it happens, but once you go outside of your window of tolerance, you're not going to be processing anymore, because now you've dissociated, you've shut down, you've disconnected. So I want to keep you inside of that window of tolerance. So it's not one of those things where you're like, it's a 10, but it's probably like actually like a 15 to other people, but it's a 10 to me. Like you want to not like just grin and bear it. You want to be mindful and listen to your body. So once you process it, the cool thing about brain spotting and what I really love about it, and I think that it's helped a lot of people be more comfortable with it, is you don't have to talk. You don't have to tell me anything. Even if you're trying to pull up that original body feeling, if you can pull that body sensation up on your own, just kind of like visualizing it, then you don't really have to tell me anything, because I'm going off of those cues. So when the person is processing, I would say probably 99% of my service members don't talk. And so what I'm looking for is the eye blinks. When the parasympathetic has been activated, then I'll start to see the yawning. And that tells me that the parasympathetic has come on board and it's starting to calm your system down. And my whole theme is all about waves, because I'm teaching you to ride the wave, because the emotion will come in a wave. Whatever the feeling is, whether it's neck tension or body aches or body pains, or the anxiety or the fear, whatever the feeling is, it's going to feel intense. And if you stick with it long enough, it's going to dip down and get better. And that's kind of the hardest part about that, right? Is because I'm making you feel all the feelings. And that's usually the thing that people are trying to avoid. And so that can be really uncomfortable for people. And so we just kind of take it at your pace. It doesn't have to be, like any major thing where we dive deep into some major trauma right away. It's literally at your pace. And you're learning to self-heal. So it's going off of the understanding that your body has the ability to heal itself, and that we just stop listening to our body. And so I'm teaching you how to listen to your body again. It's really cool. Obviously, I'm super biased about it, but I've never seen results like this before. I have, within the clientele I have some guys with TBI that I'm working with. I have a lot of people who have chronic illnesses that they have no idea, there's no medical reason for them. So they'll come in here and we'll work on those. Interestingly enough, I would say 90% of the clients I see have had a major brain injury, and probably about the same amount of them seem to have tinnitus. A lot of sleeping problems come in my door. And the cool thing about brain spotting is it makes you really freaking tired. So after this session, you're mentally exhausted. And so usually people are able to sleep really well, and they're able to see results pretty quickly. At least, I mean, from the get-go, as far as just the initial deactivation of that activating event. But I have people tell me a lot of positive feedback about the responses to it. Depending upon whatever the issue is we're working on, it can be a one and done. It can be one session where maybe the event was, I've had a lot of kid test takers that are terrified of taking tests. So something like that might be a one and done. Whereas I have a TBI that I'm working with right now that was a result of an accident. And so with the brain spotting, we go through the accident over and over and over again. And each time it's a different spot. It's never the same spot. And each time the person recalls more memory from it. And you kind of start from that oh shit moment, like that moment where you knew things were gonna turn. And it's been really fulfilling. So now the repeated brain spotting, we'll go through it again and again and again until that memory no longer elicits a negative feeling. So we're kind of like neutralizing it, right? Which is really good, because now we're neutralizing your nervous system. So when it comes up to a threat that reminds it of something, maybe an experience you've been through before, instead of automatically putting you in fight or flight response, you're going to be able to look at that threat neutrally and decide, positive or negative. versus just kind of automatically going into that default of threat, threat, threat. So that's how we deregulate the nervous system. Once the nervous system is deregulated, excuse me, the allergies are making my voice cracky. Once we deregulate the nervous system, that's when the fun starts, because that's when we get to do the performance enhancement work. So all of those high performing personalities that come in, they want to do things. They don't want to be stuck. They don't want to be going through the motions. You know, they want to be doing something, whatever that thing may be. I have a lot of athletes. I have a lot of retired athletes who still have that athlete kind of mindset. A lot of business owners that get stuck, and they, you know, whatever their goal is, the performance part of brain spotting is, we'll start from a, this is where I combine the sports psychology techniques. So we'll use visualization and mindfulness, and we'll go through a peak performance exercise, and I can help them get into a flow state. So if you guys aren't familiar with a flow state or being in the zone, it's like when you're in that moment where everything seems effortless and you're just rocking it. And you'll see it a lot in sports, but you can get into a flow state with work too, where you're just like pumping out, you know, you're doing your job, you're pumping things out, you don't even notice time's flying by, and you're enjoying it. And, you know, before you know it, the day is over. So that's the flow state. So what I can do is help people get into a flow state with brain spotting and visualization. And so what I like about this combination of things is, originally when I left base, I'm not gonna lie, I was burnt out and fed up, and I had no intention of doing counseling. I left to start a performance coaching business. And I don't know, a couple of weeks into it, that's when I learned about brain spotting and got trained in it. And so then everything turned around. But I had gone to school for the sports psych, and I was like, dude, I'm just going to do sports psych coaching. Athletes, you know, they want to be there. They want to improve. They, you know, they have that internal motivator. And what I realized from the sports psych stuff is the mental performance stuff, it's really good, but they're teaching those skills on top of that dysregulation. So you're trying to teach over something. You're just putting a Band-Aid on it. And if you're really in that moment of fight or flight, or you're really in a freeze state, like, are you going to remember to, you know, stop and do your visualization? Like, maybe you are, maybe you aren't. But how about we use the visualization and the brain spotting ahead of time to clear your nervous system, so you're not automatically jumping into fight, flight, or freeze. So that's the way that I kind of got pulled back into the counseling piece of things. But now, the other thing that I wanted to mention is I also use what's called the safe and the safe and sound protocol. So when you're in that chronic state of fight or flight, your middle ear muscle is changing. So your focus, your hearing focus, is shifting from human voice. You're starting to pick up more of the background noise, and you're focusing more on the background noise. And so a lot of times when people are dysregulated and they're in that state of fight or flight, that chronic state of fight or flight, they're unable to shift that focus back to human voice. So like if you're going to a bar, you're going out, and all you're hearing is that background noise, your ears have refocused. You've rewired for that hypervigilance. You're focusing on the things that might signal danger. And so this listening system that I have, it's a 5-day auditory intervention. You're listening to music, it's just at a specific frequency, and it's retuning the that middle ear muscle. And so all of the other things that I'm going to talk about, it's like the things that you guys can do at home. Those are all things aimed at your vagus nerve. So the vagus nerve is where the parasympathetic is, and you have the 2 branches. So when you have that low vagal tone, that's when you'll see a lot of the issues. One of the big ones that I've seen that the MARSOC people here on base use, I think it's the PRES program or whoever it is, I think they're starting to incorporate the HRV training, which is a really good way to get that vagal tone built back up and stimulate the vagus nerve. you guys, if you haven't heard of heart math is a good one, a good place to start. And I believe they also offer a military scholarship. So I believe you can apply to get one of their systems for free. And then Aura Ring is another one I hear a lot about, and that's a wearable for HRV. I think a lot of I think Apple Watch, I don't have one, but I think that might keep track of HRV. I'm not sure how accurate or good it is, but if you can get into that HRV training, that's a good way, because what that's gonna do is increase your coherence. So the other things that I have that you guys can do at home, these are probably things you've heard a million times, but the importance of them, I think, is underrated. So ways to strengthen your vagal nerve is breathing exercises. And when I tell people to do breathing, this used to be the biggest thing that irritates me on bass, because they'd be like, oh, I tried breathing, it doesn't work. And I'm like, it's breathing, it works for everyone. So you guys just have to get into a practice of it. You really need to find what works for you, because you can do box breathing, which is the inhale for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. Then I've seen it done like 5, 6, 7, where you inhale for 5, hold for 6, release for 7. It's really what you prefer. Make sure that you're doing the belly breathing, and you're not doing, the breathing where your shoulders are going up and down, that you're breathing correctly. But with breathing, I think for it to work, in my experiences, you got to find the one that you like. And if you can practice it at least 5 to 10 minutes a day, that's optimal. Because when you focus on your breathing, that's going to slow your heart rate down. And when you slow your heart rate down, that's going to bring your parasympathetic online and calm you down. So breathing is huge. Mindfulness is huge. I think sometimes people will confuse mindfulness and meditation, and then there's mindful meditation. But with mindfulness, it's like I was talking about with the brain spotting. You're sitting there and you're just kind of letting whatever come up, come up. I hear a lot of times people will get frustrated with it because they think they need to clear their mind. It's not about clearing your mind. It's just about letting what come up, letting what needs to come up, and kind of looking at it with non-judgmental curiosity. You're not trying to understand why it's coming up. You're not trying to give it a reason. You're just kind of letting it go. Yoga is a huge one. And I believe that they're starting to implement eye rest. I think you can go to a class here on base, and as far as what I'm familiar with eye rest is, I think it's a combination of mindfulness, breathing, and I think they have yoga that they'll offer too. And really, that's really good because it's helping you slow your breathing down, focus on your breathing, stimulate that parasympathetic and calm down. Cold exposure is a huge one. If you guys are familiar with Wim Hof and the Wim Hof method, he's an interesting guy. He's like this, 60-year-old Scandinavian guy who scales Mount Everest in like shorts and flip-flops. But he has a specific breathing technique where you like pump yourself up and you get your nervous system, your sympathetic going, and then you take those controlled breaths and you use that to deal with the cold exposure. And you learn how to control your nervous system through your breathing and expose yourself to the cold. Because when you go into that cold, that's gonna signal that shock, or the sympathetic. And so to gain control of that with your breathing. So cold exposure is a good one too. And then of course, brain spotting. I'm a big fan of that, in case you didn't know already. And then the safe and sound protocol. They do have other things as well. The brain spotting, I can teach people how to self-spot, so I can teach them how to do it at home. If you guys are interested, I can give you the sheet that walks you through it. When you do it at home, you're not trying to process any major trauma, maybe just like the frustration of the day or something, or if you're feeling a little bit of anxiety, and you do it from a place of feeling calm and grounded, so that resource place versus that place of activation, because you're going to want, if you're starting from a place of activation, or you're wanting to work on anything major, then it's definitely best to do it with someone who can kind of be there and help you through it. The other thing with that is So I'm not sure how many of you are currently medics. I'm not sure if there are people still in the field, but what thing that you guys have to watch out for too is compassion fatigue, or secondary trauma. So when you guys are doing what you do, I don't know, I imagine what you guys are doing, and based off the pictures I've seen on the Instagram, like I feel like you're seeing some major injuries, some major physical traumas to people's bodies. And just seeing those things can traumatize you. But also seeing people in pain, you can accumulate that in your nervous system. So start to be mindful of the things that you're exposed to. It's not that it's a negative thing, right? Because it's a normal reaction. It's just that if you don't have awareness of it, and you kind of try to like ignore, the big one is people like to ignore their feelings, right? And push them away and keep themselves busy so they don't have to feel the feels. Eventually it's gonna come up, it's gonna come back at you. And when I was talking about the traumas, I didn't actually mention any medical traumas either. So not just like psychological traumas, but physical traumas. So anytime anyone suffered a physical trauma, like they were restrained, more so with the little kids when they have to be restrained, surgeries, those are major traumas to the body. So I use brain spotting to process trauma and chronic pain as well. So that's really it.